everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Got a gaggle of SIGs on the table today. The guest of honor, of course, is this P365 that we're going to be doing the review on. But I just wanted to briefly show, SIG's background has been primarily hammer guns. In the past they've been hammer guns. The all metal, alloy, heavy duty type guns like this, like the P229 or the 226, service weapon size. Though they did actually go into smaller guns, concealed carry guns like this, but again, hammer guns, all metal frame, 1911-ish operation. They had a couple polymer frame guns in the past, but they were hammer guns like the 250 and the 224 that would be about this size. They had some wildly popular guns once they got into the 320. That's one that really took off. Striker base gun, interchangeable grips, and just took off like wildfire. And now they've come into the super small, thin, concealed carry, single stack size guns, even though this one has a little more capacity than a typical single stack. And that's the one we're going to talk about today, is the P365. So let me clean up all these other SIGs and we'll pick back up and talk about the gun that the video is actually about. Now that we've got all that SIG eye candy put away, we can focus on the guest of honor, the P365. The P365 is a single stack size gun that actually has double stack capacity. Most of the single stacks in this size territory are going to hold anywhere between 6 or 7 rounds plus 1. This one holds 10 plus 1 and still maintains the thickness of a regular single stack. Start out by showing, of course, it is unloaded. The gun itself has 2 magazines that come with it, this 10-round flush mount magazine and a 10-round extended magazine. And I've got this one loaded with snap caps because we don't own this gun. This was lent to us by a local viewer, and even though you are supposedly able to dry fire the P365, we don't own it, so we're not going to dry fire it. But this has a little pinky extender, and it's only 10 rounds, so it's basically the same magazine with a pinky extender base plate. And you can also get an optional 12-round magazine where the extender is actually an extender. And that one does blend well into the grip, like a lot of others that you see where you get now basically a 3-finger full-size grip. So they've done that real well with the blending. The texture you get is very similar to the P320, kind of a sandpaper-ish grainy texture, and slight finger grooves. Textured backstrap, but the backstrap on this gun is not replaceable. Same as the P365, where you would actually buy other grip frames. However, when I get this apart, the P320. The P320 has replaceable grip frames. When you look at this does when I get it apart, this appears to have the chassis, but it doesn't just pop out like it does on a 320. There's a pin here at the back. I'm not aware of this going with the replaceable grip frame strategy. As far as a few of the other features, it has SIG's X-ray sights. Now there was a little bit of drama with these when they first came out related to the sights being part of a malfunction. They come with this set of sights now. A lot of people are calling this the Gen 2. SIG does not officially call this a Gen 2, but you might hear it called that. As far as the issues that they had with the sights, this new sight combination, as far as I know, has resolved that. And we didn't have one of the earlier ones. He got this about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And this sight combination supposedly doesn't have any of those issues. The only thing I did find with this is at the range, the rear sights, which are a night sight, they end up being just kind of vague gray dots. The front sight stands out really, really well, but I had a real hard time seeing the rear, and it slowed me down quite a bit. Now the gun is capable of pulling tight groups. It just takes a little bit longer focusing on the sights. And of course, as a close-in self-defense, deep concealed carry, it may not be designed for shooting longer ranges, and that may be a little less important. Mostly you're wanting to get on the target, not necessarily doing bullseye shooting with it. As far as dimensions, the gun is 5.8 inches long, it's 4.3 inches tall, and it's 1 inch thick. And that's one of the claims to fame on this, is that you're getting double stack capacity, which usually be 1.25 to 1.5 inches thick on a double stack, in a single stack profile. And that has to do all with the way they've designed the mags. And from what I've heard, they designed the mag and then built the gun around it. I'm not sure how true that is, but the effect is actually pretty impressive. Very thin gun, yet 10+1 capacity. It does have front and rear serrations. It does have a rail, but it's not a Picatinny rail. It's what they call a SIG rail. So you're going to be limited in the accessories that you can put on this rail. The sights themselves are dovetailed and can be easily replaced. The magazine release can be swapped over to the other side, or swapped over to the other side, but there are no other ambidextrous controls. And flipping the magazine release around is fairly easy to do without having to buy any additional parts. Now SIG says this weighs 17.8 ounces. We weighed it with a magazine 18.4 and without 16.4. So I'm not exactly sure where the 17.8 came in, but it's somewhere in between those depending on whether you've got a mag in it or not. Of course, loaded up, it's going to weigh a little bit more. So it's not a heavy gun. It's not a thick gun. It's an easy and comfortable to hold gun. So it's got a lot of pluses going for it. There have been some issues with this. We had the original issue, which we didn't personally experience with the sights, and they've rectified that. But there have been a number of other channels that are having various malfunctions with them when they get a number of rounds down range. Harry's Holsters, they make holsters. We did a review on one of their holsters. They've also got a YouTube channel, and they've been doing a 500,000, 1,500 type of range testing. They got to 2,000 rounds and their firing pin failed. So there may be some things where SIG hasn't quite got all the bugs out of this platform. When they do, it's going to be a really nice setup because of the size of it and the comfort of it and the capacity. Kind of takes away from that trade-off that you usually have to make with a small gun, giving up capacity. So let's go ahead and get this thing apart, show you some of the internals, and show you one other issue that we've discovered with this particular one that may be of interest. Takedown is fairly easy. You lock it back, and at the same time you have an opportunity to verify that it's clear. Flip this lever down. So far it's a lot like the P320. Release it. Now it feels like it's hung up, and it feels like you have to pull the trigger. You don't, and you shouldn't. You just kind of give it a little bit more of a pull, and you may have to hold this forward, and it'll pop off. So you don't have to pull the trigger. And if you do, and if you end up pulling the trigger either during the takedown or afterwards, there's a little arm up here that will stick up and may not go back down. And you'll have to make sure that when you go to put it back together that you push that down, because it'll hang up on the side when you go to reassemble it. But if you do touch the trigger, it won't hurt anything. You'll also find that this has a tendency not to stay put. And if it does come all the way back up, you won't be able to push it down without pushing up on the slide release. Just another nuance. Not a big deal, they're just kind of weird little things, but it doesn't prevent you from taking it apart easily or putting it back together. Just something to know. And as far as the lower part of the gun itself, it's got two full-length guide rails, the slide rails on both sides, and it's fairly simple. The sears back here, there's not a whole lot going on, and you've got the locking block, and this is going to come into play a little bit, the frame side of it, in the issue that we found on the barrel when I get it out. And what it'll relate to is the edges of this are actually curved. They curve up right here. They kind of flare up at the edges on both sides. And that's going to be important when I show you the other issue that we did find with this gun. Overall, it does appear to be very well constructed. The metal components are stainless steel, and it does look like this section will come out, but with this pin, it's not quite the same as a P320 where you just pop it out by pulling out the takedown lever and quickly drop it into another frame. This one doesn't appear to be set up to do that. Let's talk about the slide. It has a dual captive guide rod. Comes out relatively easy. So you've got your dual recoil spring assembly. Here's the barrel. It's a 3.1 inch barrel. Pretty standard looking barrel. It's actually well machined. It has a nice feed ramp. We didn't have any feed issues with this. We did have one issue where it failed to lock back. But that could have been anything. Could have been ammo. It's unlikely that it was actually me hitting the slide stop, simply because of the way the gun's set up. My hands wouldn't have been anywhere near there. But as far as feeding, we've had no feed issues with it at all. The one issue we do see, and this is going to be fairly difficult to show on camera, there's two things that would be of interest. The issue really focuses on the edges right here. And if you look in there, you can see the wear pattern where it's kind of polished it shiny, so it's worn off the protective coating. And you'll see that in the center here, there is no wear. It's still black. The nitron coating is still intact. But at the edges out here, right there and over here, there's some peening. And what's ended up happening is it looks like it's putting all the force on these edges because that piece in the frame flares up. So instead of distributing the load when the gun fires and tries to recoil while it's still locked, instead of distributing it across this entire area, it's focusing it on the edges. And that's actually resulting in a little bit of peening, where it's acting like a hammer and pounding it down. And I can get some of the oil off here. You can see, if I get the camera stable, you can see the edge here. And even if you can't see it, if I take something like this and I push it, you can see where it hangs up and then cuts loose. That's that edge. And it's on both sides, where it's kind of just pounded down. I'll grab this with the other hand so that I can get the camera to focus on it. Can't get it to focus. There it goes. Doesn't like to focus in close like that. And again, it hangs up right there. So what's happening is it's flattening that piece out and really kind of beating it up. That is going to probably cause some long-term problems. And eventually it will wear that edge down enough that it starts to go evenly, but at that point you'll actually have kind of a flare there. And that may cause some function issues as you get into 2, 3, 4, 5,000 rounds. That I'm not sure how many other people have encountered that, if that's something that's happening with just this gun. But I'm going to let the owner know about it when I give it back to him. But I won't have this gun necessarily long term, so I'll have to keep in touch with him to see whether he sends it back to SIG for them to look at, or if he continues to run it and whether it causes him any issues. Other than that, we haven't had any trouble with this gun at all. So that it's been, it functioned well, it worked well, and the only issue again we did have is one failure to lock back, and that there's so many reasons that could happen that I wouldn't get hung up on that. On the rest of the slide, it's well machined, very well done. It does have a drop safety, which is right here by the end of my fingernail. So it's got your striker block safety. And other than that, in the internals of it, it's pretty consistent. There is one other thing that we did notice, is quite a bit of wear right here where it's worn away the finish. But it has not worn a matching pattern on the barrel, other than just a little bit of a haze that you can see right here. So there are a little bit of tolerance issues, and I don't know if that has anything to do with the peening and the barrel sticking a little bit. But again, the gun has functioned, but I do have some concerns about its long-term durability with some of those little issues going on. Putting it back together is fairly easy. Slide the barrel in, slide the recoil spring in. It really assembles quickly, and it almost self-centers, so it's not really any difficulty. Now when you go to put it back on the gun, you do need to make sure that this is down. Make sure that if you had played with the trigger, the little arm is down or it will hang up. And of course, I don't know how strong that arm is. If you got pushing on it, you could potentially damage it. Slide it back onto the frame, and when it gets to here, it's going to feel like it's stuck. But it's not. You just kind of give it a little bit of a pull, and then lock it back. And depending on when you lock it back and push up on this, it'll usually flop that arm back up. But if it doesn't, flip the arm back up, and then you're back in operation. So it's really easy to take apart and put back together, other than it's got a few little tiny quirks throughout the process. But they aren't anything that makes it difficult for somebody to do, or that makes it overly complicated. As far as the trigger goes, it's looks like a P320-ish gun, and the trigger looks a lot like the P320. So you'd figure it would have the same trigger as the P320, which actually has a fairly nice trigger. But the trigger is actually a little different. So I'm going to load up one of these snap caps. There's a moderate amount of take-up, and the take-up's not that bad. And then it's kind of creepy. It creeps and creeps and creeps and creeps, and then it hits a sharp, crisp break at the end. So it's kind of an unusual combination. Usually when you've got a gun that has a lot of trigger creep, you get a vague break. And on the flip side, when you've got a really crisp break, you tend not to have creep. But this one does actually creep a little bit, as well as have kind of a vague break. Now that's my fault. I short-cycled it, so that's not a malfunction in the gun. I short-cycled it trying to get that out of there. Trying to put the snap cap in. So I'll show you the trigger again. There's creep, then a break. Now as far as a reset goes, it's got a decent reset. It's not quite all the way out. That would be all the way out. It's got a decent reset. And then you're right back on the beginning of that, you know, that little bit of creep and then that crisp break. So it's got a decent trigger. Now the one thing I did find at the range, I was having a little bit of difficulty because I was having a little trouble seeing the sights. I was having to focus a little harder, and that was causing me to pull the trigger a little slower, and that creep started to come into play. I noticed the creep. If I were pulling the trigger a little bit more quickly, for example, if I had been able to see the sights a little more quickly and was just getting on the target, I might not have noticed the creep as much. It's not bad. It's not a really awful trigger, but it's not quite as crisp as some of the other guns that I would compare it with, and I would have expected a slightly better trigger. The trigger is actually somewhat similar to an XDS, if you've ever fired an XDS. Again, you have that moderate take up and then a decent amount of creep to a crisp break at the end. So it's not unheard of to have that type of trigger, and of course this gun's been fairly popular, but the P320 has minimal creep and a nice crisp break, so it's just a little bit different. From a size comparison, and of course this is trying to compete with the ultra conceal, single stack, light territory, and there's quite a few guns in that market. You have SIG's own gun, the 938, which is a single stack 9. Now this is an alloy gun, so this is your 1911-ish, cocked and locked, all metal gun. But from a size perspective, let me take the magazine out so we're doing fair, just comparing the frames. You'll see it's just a little bit taller, and it's actually about the same length as a 938. Some of the things like the trigger guard and things like that kind of line up differently, but it's about the size of a 938. And of course the 938 is a 9mm, and from a thickness perspective, it's roughly the same. It's actually a hair thinner. Of course it looks thinner because it has a tapered slide. And then if you want to compare it to some of the other popular guns, you have something like this PM9, which is Carr's double action only 9mm, and this one holds 6+1. And of course the Carr also makes the CM9s, basically the same basic gun with a few performance and minor technical differences. It's about the same size in all dimensions. Maybe the SIG is just a hair longer. But again, you're getting 10 in the SIG +1, and then you're getting 6+1 in the PM9, CM9. And last but not least, of course, what comparison wouldn't be a comparison without a Glock in it? So you have the Glock 43. Now, the SIG is significantly shorter than the Glock 43 lengthwise. It's about the same height, roughly the same thickness, but holds 4 more rounds. So for comparison against the Glock 43, it does have an advantage in both size and capacity. So overall, they're coming into a crowded market, but they've actually done a very good entry into that market. Hopefully a few of these little minor technical nuances get worked out, which they tend to get worked out in new guns. And overall, it's not a bad gun. One thing I had forgotten to do when I had it disassembled was to show you the barrel. So we'll go ahead and light that up. You can see it's conventional rifling. Nice and smooth. So there's a lot of details that are well done on the gun. My current recommendation might be to wait until a few of these little nitpicky things are being worked out in the market. Things like the issue that Harry's Holsters has had, and that little peening issue we found. There might be a few more things that need to be worked out before you spend close to $600 on this. The MSRP right now is $599, and from best as I can tell, they're in short supply, so the retailers are getting it. Nobody's getting discounts on these right now. Of course, once they flood the market with them, that'll change, and hopefully by then a little bit of the nitpicky stuff will be dealt with. But beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Patreon, and have a great day. Thank you.